Today, though, we're going to talk about compassion. And the truth is that to invoke compassion, to call it forth, and to engage in compassion, all I need to do is preach on it. You see, compassion means, calm means with, and passion actually means suffering, right? So, by the way, if you are passionate for something, it doesn't mean that you are hyper enthusiastic about it. It means that you are willing to suffer for it. So at any rate, compassion means suffering with. Suffering with. So here is how we engage in compassion just by me talking about it. It's that because this is officially the 432nd trillionth time someone has preached on compassion, it is so boring. Compassion is, so passé from the pulpit, it seems to me. And so just by preaching on it, I have made you suffer. And you are together. So you are suffering together. And we have achieved compassion. So that's beautiful. My job is done. I'm on vacation. Go in peace. So this is officially the 432nd trillionth time someone has preached on compassion, and that's like in the last day and a half. And seriously, compassion is so fundamental to the religions of the world that it has become a little passé and a little easy to hear. It has been the response to grace and the grace of being ever since the axial age, right? So that was like 3,000 years ago. And that is actually the most interesting thing about compassion. Well, there's two things really. First, what this means is that compassion was not always, presumably, the cornerstone to the human religious response to life. So to put it in gross terms that I can probably get away with saying that prior to the axial age, some 3,000 years ago, the main response to life was devotion and obedience, which is essentially organized fear. And then Buddha and Hillel and Joshua of Nazareth came along and let us know that compassion is a more appropriate response, a more effective response, a response that is more pleasing to the heart of God or the thrums of a more resonant chord on the cosmic Stratocaster. Compassion, not devotion, is the response to the miracle of living and the pain of being alive. But it wasn't always the cornerstone. And that gives rise to the other really interesting thing about compassion, because just about the least interesting thing about compassion is actually acting compassionately, or actually that's the second least interesting thing. The least interesting thing is listening to me talk about it. The other really interesting thing about compassion is that while it wasn't always the cornerstone to the religious response to being, it actually has been for 2,500 to 3,000 years. Think of where we have come in that time. All the things that we now take for granted that back then we couldn't even imagine. We invented the printing press. We developed electricity, or we discovered electricity. We found that petroleum could make all kinds of stuff, like fuel for cars and plastic and Twinkies and Justin Bieber. That was not compassionate. That was mean. Well, we discovered that petroleum can make all kinds of things, like central heating and global warming. And yet, the one thing that we already knew that whole time, that compassion is the response to being alive, that's the thing that we just can't quite seem to make part of our day. I mean, think about it. If we were compassionating all over the place, would there be a need for the person who did it before me to deliver the 431st trillionth sermon on compassion? Evidently, his group didn't get it either. So here I am, and this is your chance. Stop the madness. Only you can prevent the 433rd, trillionth sermon on compassion in the last 2 days. I mean, if compassion were as ubiquitous and matter of course as driving or as breathing, we wouldn't have to do this today. We would just breathe in and breathe out. We would compassionate here and there together. Or maybe not. I mean, I don't know that we breathe that well all the time. And come to think of it, there's a link between breathing and compassion. In fact, I would say there is a greater correlation between breathing well and compassion than there is between acting compassionately and a sermon extolling you to act compassionately. So, 1970, Princeton Seminary. They did an experiment. There was a group of students in a homiletics class, so a sermon writing class, and they were given assignments. Half were given the assignment of preaching on the text of the Good Samaritan, and the other half were given a sermon topic of what seminary prepares me for. Then they were all sent to different buildings and rooms across campus to deliver their sermon. And on the way, every student encountered a man doubled over and moaning. And what they found was that it didn't matter who was assigned the Good Samaritan and who was assigned the text of what kind of job does preaching prepare me to do. That had nothing to do with who stopped to help the man. Priming the pump was not a factor. So essentially, I'm useless up here today. Totally superfluous to you doing what you came here to hear about doing. I can give you the biology of compassion, that it is enabled by mirror neurons, and that being compassionate stimulates the production of serotonin, endorphins, and DHEA in our bodies. Serotonin, which helps us heal, calms us down, and makes us happy. Endorphins, which are natural painkillers 3 times as potent as morphine, and so it just makes you feel really, really good. And DHEA, which slows down aging, a nugget of which I imagine some within these walls might find interesting. So I can give you that biology and tell you that compassionate acts do all this not only for the person being kind, but for the person receiving the kindness and for anyone witnessing it. And in fact, I have told you that before. I can illustrate by way of social science experiments or parables or personal testimony how compassion changes lives. I can tell you that it is the gateway to enlightenment, as it was for that pioneer of enlightenment, Gautama Buddha, as when he experienced enlightenment for the first time, not under the Bodhi tree as an adult, but next to a field being plowed under as a child, witnessing the life being destroyed to give him life. Suffering with. I can demonstrate that compassion is the key to salvation. Salvation, as I define it, as the freedom of fear. For how can one willingly suffer with, intentionally suffer with another, and still be oppressed by the tyranny of fear? I can justify compassion with logic. I can demonstrate that due to our respect for the inherent dignity of people and the interconnection of all life, that compassion is not only our opportunity, but our responsibility, and therefore the path to freedom. I could do all this and it won't matter. Because when it comes to compassion, in more than 2,500 of years, that kind of pedagogy has worked only in the exception and not in the main. Because here we are, needing to remind ourselves of it for the 400 trillionth time this week. And we'll need it again, because even though we know it's right, even though we know it's good, even though we know what it does for us and each other and the world and the interconnected web, for the universe and God if you want to, even though we know it's beautiful, we just don't have time. We just don't have the time. So you remember the Princeton Study and how people's compassion was not determined by how much they primed the pump. You know, it did determine how compassionate people were, because some did stop and help the man. Not all ministers to be are jerks. What determined aid was each student's sense of how much time they had to get to their appointed building. I'm not making that up. Remember the last time that you didn't help someone. You kept on driving even though there was an elderly person with a flat tire on the side of the road. Something. Remember the last time that you chose not to suffer with. What was the reason that you gave yourself? And then later you feel guilty, you think you're a bad person, you consider becoming a Presbyterian. But dollars to donuts, time is part of that justification for not helping. The failure to live lives of compassion is not a failure of ethics or spirit. We all want to be good, to be heroes. The failure to live lives of compassion is not a failure of ethics or spirit. It's bad time management. Or, really at the end of the day, it is your priorities, but let's not focus on that. We've been focusing on that for a millennia and, mixed results. So let's try something new. Let's try thinking about time. Do we have enough? How do we make more? Because we can make more, because time is a sense for us as much as a fact. Time is like broccoli. Broccoli is there and it definitely has a taste, but what it tastes like is a matter of perspective and can even change. So time is like that. One way to change your taste of time, by the way, is breathing. So here's a correlation between compassion and breathing I mentioned earlier. And this is where you emerge from church with something to do, two things to do. And you're actually going to get a third, so lots of homework. But don't leave with the intention to be more compassionate. So today, your minister said that time was like broccoli and you shouldn't be more compassionate. It's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you want to be more compassionate, you should leave here with the intention of breathing, of setting aside time to set aside time, to breathe into that time and thereby expand it in the moment and eventually always. And this works, trust me. I don't know why or how. Maybe because it creates more time inside, more spaciousness inside in that moment, and eventually always. I mean, wouldn't that be a nice feeling anyway? What other delicious things could you do with a sense of more spaciousness in your life? Stopping to breathe will enable us to stop, to know how to stop, and help the ailing man, the stranded senior, the aching planet. Breathe. Let's not focus on the shoulds of compassion. Let's focus on discovering the spaciousness of our lives. And then our inherent dignity will have room to flourish. Our interdependence will combine with our inherent dignity to call us into compassionate relationships with each other, with all living creatures, with Mother Earth, with our lives, and with life itself. So let's breathe together. For real, get yourself comfortable. You don't have to achieve the sense of spaciousness right now in this moment. There's really even nothing to achieve. Just breathe. You may wish to start off with one or two really deep inhales and cleansing breaths. And then just breathe. As normal as can be. Maybe notice where you feel it the most, in your belly or your chest, in your nostrils or on the tip of your lips. Just breathe. Let this be a trajectory and a mindset that you carry with you that is accessible at any moment. Cultivate that sense of spaciousness that will allow you to do amazing things. So come back into the room. If your eyes were closed, you could open up your eyes because you're probably going to want to see what comes next.